Hello and welcome to News Central Television. I am Liken Obanjo. The top stories at this hour. In a milestone for tax administration in Nigeria, President Tinubu signs 4 tax reform bills into law. Court sentences singer Oluwatimileyin Ajayi to death for the murder of core member Salome Adaidu. National mourning declared in Central African Republic after deadly school stampede that killed dozens of pupils. Details to come your way shortly. We begin the news in Abuja, where President Bola Tinubu on Thursday signed the 4 tax reform bills into law at the presidential villa. Tinubu said the tax reforms are aimed at relieving low-income earners, small businesses and families. He said the 4 bills, the Nigeria Tax Bill, Fair Taxation, Nigeria Tax Administration Bill, Nigeria Revenue Service Establishment Bill, and the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Bill, will unify the country's fragmented tax system. The presidency asserts that the laws will also eliminate wasteful duplications, reduce red tape, restore investor confidence and trust, and promote transparency, including coordination at all levels. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Olufemi Babem, who is a partner, Consumer Industrial Market Tax Group of KPMG in Nigeria. Olufemi, good evening to you. While we expect Olufemi's response, we also have a tax lawyer and a consultant, Evans Ofeli. Evans, it's nice to have you join us on the news.
Very well. Good evening.
So I'll probably just start with you. Now, how convinced are you that these tax reform bills will transform tax administration in Nigeria?
Yeah, it is expected that it will transform tax administration in Nigeria, given the outlook and the overview of the new law. First, it's going to set out new parameters. Okay, if you look at the personal income tax, for example, as it stands today, if you earn less than 800,000 naira per month, you will not have to pay tax anymore. That's personal income tax. So it's bringing so many reforms. Company income tax that used to be 30% has been reduced to 25%, and that's incentive for investors. This new tax law will set a positive agenda when properly implemented. You know, implementation is very critical. That's why I'm emphasizing on it. If you look at the overview, it has given us a new lease of life that will encourage investors' confidence in the scheme of things. You remember that during the hearing at the National Assembly, that the issue of VAT was actually increased to 10% at that hearing, at the first outlook of the tax law. But during deliberation, it was thrown out, okay? And further innovations were brought in. The issues of essential commodity like food and drugs, that is medication, now have been taken out of VAT. So there's no longer VAT on food and medications. Okay, so I'm not a fan of this government, but when you see a document, a law that is progressive, far-reaching, and public, that gives public incentive, we need to accentuate the fact that this government have done well in that area. Okay, because it has taken into consideration the fact that the people have no disposable income. And because subsidies was gone and the free fall of the naira kicked in, the exchange rate is still very high and all that. It is only natural to have a tax law that will be people friendly. Okay, and that is why you see that from company income tax to personal income tax, so tax across the value chain, economic policy, we're now going to have a new look, okay? And this new look is going to be far-reaching because the bill itself has introduced some incentive to get those who before now have been evading tax to come into the net. Companies and institutions and persons that hitherto have not been adherent to the strict rule of our tax. Now we have a seamless tax law that we, enhance business and the lives of Nigerians.
Okay, so even as we see the streamlining of these tax bills, will they actually generate the much needed revenue? Because of course there will be some sheddings in some areas, even as we also look at the reduction in financial encumbrances, unevenness in some places, and of course exploitation.
Yeah, it will if properly implemented. Yeah, it has the overview of it stipulates so many innovations that will jack up tax revenues. The government intention is to bring tax to a place of where it can contribute maximally to our GDP. Because if you look at it, in first world countries, they mainly survive on tax. Tax alone is capable. Tax should generate at least 30 to 35% of a GDP of a nation. If you have the right and good tax law and you manage it in a way that you're able to bring maximum persons and institutions under the net, such that they are paying and they are seeing that the economy is growing concurrently. You understand? That is when you manage tax very well, because the tax revenue is actually for public development, for infrastructural development for public use. So those who pay tax is for the general use of the public. That's what tax fund is meant for. But where tax is collected and embezzled, and we allow the loopholes to exist, or we allow persons who know nothing about tax to head tax institutions and manage our tax administration, we will run into more problems.
So that is actually, Evans,
understand.
Evans, that's actually where the challenge is right now. You keep hammering on implementation. So what measures would you like to see in place to deal with or to assist in, quality implementation, deal with accountability, and of course ensure transparency?
Yeah, I would like to look more on the area of automation, using technology to collect the revenues, and such that we have less of human engagement that will lead to widespread corruption and leakages. We have so many innovations in the technological sphere through which tax can be properly collected and accounted for. So if we have that automation and then we set that in motion, because it's not enough to have the law. The law needs to be broken down into day-to-day implementation and administration. That is the guideline, okay, for which, but this government have done amazingly on this, because these tax duplications and all the humongous issues we've had before now have been streamlined into a simple tax document. Okay, but it is that management I talked about that we need automation. We need to engage the technology that will make accountability seamless and create less of human engagement that will put a hole, a leakage on the new. Because the only thing that can drain the new law or drain implementation is where you now have tax managers that do not understand the objective of tax. Tax is national income. Okay. National income is for the collective good of society.
All right. Okay, so let me just quickly bring Olufemi Babemi into this discussion before we wrap it up. And I'd like to get your own assessment of the tax reform bills signed by the president, most especially when the committee emphasized that the reform bills are people-centric and it would assist more the business ecosystem and individuals who earn less.
For having me on the show. And I think it's important to also reiterate the messaging from Evans that, implementation is extremely important. And that's where we'll see the values of the bill or the new law that has been passed. So we see the value of the Tax Act, take effect in the lives of the ordinary Nigerians. So implementation is extremely important. The Presidential Committee has done a good job of teasing out some of the key benefits of the law to ordinary Nigerians in terms of expansion of tax-exempt items, VAT-exempt items, in terms of the increase in the tax band for application of personal income tax, in terms of additional reliefs that have been introduced into the law, to try and benefit the lower income earners. And so those are some of the benefits that, should crystallize as the law is then being implemented. There are other parts to it which would involve, increased revenue generations for government, which should help which should help the government in terms of implementing some of the policies and initiatives that government has planned for itself and planned for the population. So there's a direct benefit for the citizens in terms of the reduction in the tax rate and increased exemptions for some of the items. And then there's the downstream benefit in terms of increased revenues that were accrued to government and how those revenues are then spent for the betterment of the lives of ordinary Nigerians.
Yeah, so talking about the benefits and the sharing, the distribution of the benefits, most especially the accruals, the revenue. Now, is the VAT revenue sharing formula, that is the 60% to states of consumption, 20% based on population, and 20% equity, equally shared rather, inherently biased towards southern states, as claimed by the northern governors a couple of months ago?
Okay, let me start by saying it appears that that provision is no longer in the law as it stands. The version of the bills that I saw that had been reviewed by the National Assembly changed that provision to something very similar to what we had have under the law that has now been repealed. So we no longer have the provisions of sharing of the VAT along the derivation lines based on the suggestions that were made by the National Assembly. But even if you then assume that that provision was still in the law, the question then is, is it meant to disadvantage a section of the country rather than or make some other sections favorable? And I think the way to look at it is, VAT is really a consumption tax and should follow the footprints along the lines of consumption. However, the mechanism put in place should then allow for proper tracking of consumption and also incentivize production so that we are not only incentivizing the consumption side, also incentivize production, VAT for production purposes. So it probably would have worked out in the end, but from my understanding, from the review of the amendments suggested, I haven't seen the signed version yet, but the amendments suggested by the National Assembly, that proposal was no longer going to be there.
Okay, so Evan, still talking about benefits. Now, how will the reforms focus on fiscal decentralization now empower the states, most especially to improve internally generated revenue?
Well, the decentralization is not really different from what we had before. That's if you are talking about VAT, because that's the one that has to deal with sharing. Every other tax has a personal income tax has to do with workers. The company income tax has to do with companies and revenue generation that goes to the direct authorities. But the one that has to do with VAT is the one that has to do with the sharing. Okay. Which in itself, that matter has been resolved. You remember one of the governors of the northern states, some of them during the hearing, the public hearing, went in Abuja, had raised so many issues concerning that. And those issues were resolved so that the governors even came out and said that the way the National Assembly went about the correction of that appropriation and the formula used actually is favorable to the entire country, because the objective is that tax collection is national income and it's meant for the projection of, but the most important thing is that those who will manage the tax and ensure that it is used for the benefit of society, we must get those who understand what tax is. Because we have this issue of having square pegs in round holes, where you bring somebody from medicine to come and manage tax that he knows nothing about. And he sees revenue, he doesn't know where the revenue should go to. And then before you know it, it's embezzled. For tax experts, we do not discuss tax without the public, because it is public revenue. And so, back to implementation, it is important that we implement rightly, we distribute and share according to laid down procedures, so that this will change the narrative of our tax regime.
Okay.
I mean, the commentators on this have made a lot of positive statements on that, and I see this law as one that will give us a new lease, as long as we have the right team together, and as long as we are ready to be accountable and make automations, so that this will become yielding to the society.
All right. So before we wrap up on this, we need to quickly listen to Taiwo Idele, who is the chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and, of course, tax reforms. He actually shed more light after the signing of those bills during the course of a gathering, a press briefing today. So let's listen to that. Then we'll come back to take your options or your submissions on it.
Reforms are not about raising more taxes. I think people get it wrong. A lot of people, including analysts and commentators, will say, oh, where are they going to get the more taxes from? Nigerians are poor. This is exactly trying to relieve people of the burden of taxes. These tax laws, they are now laws, are pro-poor in particular. More than 1/3 of workers in both the private and public sector will now be exempted completely from PAYE. They will not have to pay personal income tax. Small businesses, over 90% of small and micro nano businesses, we no longer have to worry about paying corporate income tax or charging VAT or even deducting withholding tax or paying PAYE for their employees. What this means is that there will be more money in the hands of the ordinary Nigerian to take care of their daily needs.
Of course, that is Taiwo Oyedele, rather, I'm sharing his thoughts as regards the tax reform bill. So I'd like to take your closing shots in response to what he said. I'll start with Olufemi. How would you rate these tax reform bills based on what Taiwo said?
Again, like I mentioned earlier, the bills really, as Taiwo summarized, has introduced a number of provisions that are beneficial for the low-income earners in Nigeria. So whether as companies or as individuals, there are certain exemptions that really would take away some of the obligations that category of businesses or individuals currently have. And so in that light, it's beneficial, right? We then have to look at the big picture in terms of how would this then impact government's revenue eventually, how would it impact, transactions with other corporate entities, and then have that holistic view of it. But he's right in the summary, in terms of the direct summaries made, there's a direct impact it will have on low-income earners and for small businesses. I think it's important for me to add here that the passage of the bills or the bills into law is a very welcome development, because it actually it's meant to transform our tax administration and transform the way tax is actually processed locally here in Nigeria. So it puts us on the same pedestal as many of the advanced countries in terms of tax administration, and should then create that balance where it would attract foreign investment with some of the incentives that will be provided, and yet have a multiplier effect on other sectors of the economy, including job creation and some of the other indices that we see.
Okay, so Evans, in terms of even spread, how do you see it, most especially for less developed regions and the developing regions? How well would it help?
Yeah, one of the highlights of this law, or this act, is that it has given those who own small businesses a lease, okay, of life in terms of its provision. Like small and medium scale businesses, for example, if you are not making up to 50 million naira a year, you are exempted completely. You understand? For personal income tax, if you are not making up to 800,000 naira a year, you are exempted completely. So that way, it unifies the low income earners, and it places them at a point where they can now have disposable income and now have to save more and improve their businesses. Okay, so that is the high point. You know, it is not when they muted this law, a lot of people went about talking about that people want they want to tax people more, they want to create problem and the rest of that. But it's not so. I mean, the former tax regime we had was even more demanding than the one under reference. Okay, so this for me is a law that has a human face, and kudos to the government for doing that at a time like this when the economy is really struggling.
Okay. Evans Ofili and of course Olufemi Babam, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the news.
My pleasure.
Of course. Let's go on a break now. When we return, INEC to conduct by-elections on August 16 to fill vacant legislative seats. We'll tell you more in a while. Don't go away. We now tell you that justice has finally been served in the case of Salome Adaidu, the National Youth Service Corps member whose brutal murder sent shockwaves across the country. Oluwatimileyin Ajayi, the man accused of killing and dismembering her, has been found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Delivering the judgment at the High Court in Lafia, Nasarawa State, Justice Simon Aboki ruled that Ajayi was guilty of culpable homicide, contrary to Section 221 of the Penal Code applicable in northern Nigeria, a crime punishable by death. Still on judicial matters, the trial of former Kogi State Governor Yahaya Bello has resumed at the Federal High Court in Abuja. Bello is facing allegations brought by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, including money laundering and the misappropriation of public funds during his time in office. One of the more contentious issues in court recently has been the FCC's unusual request to cross-examine one of its own witnesses, a move that sparked legal debate. Now, the court has delivered a ruling on that request. And so our correspondent, Joshua Marai, is live at the Federal High Court, and this time he will be sharing the updates with us. Joshua, it's nice to have you around on the news again. So kindly bring us... Yeah, you're welcome. So I'd like you to kindly bring us up to speed about the court ruling, especially where the FCC requested to cross-examine its own witness.
Good evening once again. The commencement of proceedings today at the Federal High Court in Abuja today was stated for the ruling on the EFCC's request to cross-examine its own witness. So a move that was particularly contested by the defense counsel in this case. However, the judge gave the ruling today, and the ruling favored the defense counsel. Why? The judge ruled that the EFCC cannot cross-examine its own witness unless it declares him a hostile witness, according to the Evidence Act. Well, that notwithstanding, the court went ahead to grant the EFCC the opportunity to be examining only on certain limitations, particularly that they were going to clear ambiguity that was touched upon by the defense counsel. Aside that, the court also restricted the EFCC to re-examine on particular parts of the Exhibit 19, which is the judgment by the FCC High Court in this case. And particularly, the judge instructed the EFCC to only touch pages 1, 14, and 15 of the Exhibit 19, that is the judgment of the Abuja High Court. And this is where we are in this case. However, the proceedings went forward, and they brought a fourth witness, that is the person of Michelle Abata. Michelle Abata is the Zenith Bank compliance officer who came to testify that a total of 1.968 billion naira was withdrawn from a government account with the bank, so this state government account with the bank. So that is where we are. However, the judge adjourned to tomorrow, that is the 27th of June, for a continuation of the trial and cross-examination of that particular witness by the defense counsel.
Okay, so what has been the general reaction to this case, and for how long do you think it will drag?
Well, the EFCC has series of witnesses lined up for them to prove their case of alleged money laundering on the part of the former convicted governor. Well, we expect that the EFCC is going to bring those witnesses one after the other to substantiate their claims. The defense counsel is not backing out; they are ready for a fight tooth and nail to prove that their client, the former governor of Kogi State, is not guilty. Well, that has to be the discretion of the court to decide who is guilty and who is not guilty. So we are looking at the case and monitoring development. As soon as they come, we'll give you updates.
All right, thank you so much, Joshua Marayi, for bringing us up to speed with this court situation. We appreciate that. Let's move on now. The Independent National Electoral Commission has announced that it will conduct by-elections across affected constituencies on Saturday, August 16. The elections are being organized to fill vacant seats in the national and state assemblies, which have arisen due to resignations, deaths, and court annulments. INEC Chairman Professor Mahmoud Yakubu disclosed this during the consultative meeting with political parties in Abuja on Thursday. Now, in a step forward for Abuja's transport landscape, President Bola Tinubu has officially inaugurated the new Kudo bus terminal in the Federal Capital Territory. The state-of-the-art facility is expected to alleviate congestion, streamline interstate travel, and modernize the commutes for thousands of residents and visitors. The president was represented by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, and he called for the judicious use of the facility. Well, meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu has also commissioned another key infrastructural project within the Federal Capital Territory. The president, represented by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, said that the newly constructed bridge linking the Wole Soyinka Expressway to the Outer Northern Expressway will unlock new opportunities for commerce and contribute positively to the business community and, of course, residents alike in the capital. News Central's correspondent Amadine Uyi reports.
The bridge links the arterial road N20, also known as the Wole Soyinka Way, and runs over the Outer Northern Expressway, also known as the Murtala Mohammed Expressway. President Bola Tinubu, who was represented by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, says that the bridge will present immense benefits to citizens and is proof of the commitment of the current administration to providing world-class infrastructure.
This bridge, strategically linking key areas and easing the flow of traffic, will unlock new opportunities for commerce, reduce travel time, and contribute directly to increased productivity and a better quality of life for all who traverse these vital routes.
The Minister of the FCT, Nyesom Wike, says that the contract for the road and bridge was awarded 3 years before the current administration, but was adopted as a priority project because of its importance to citizens of the capital.
The new job was awarded in 2020, and because of the directive of Mr. President that every project that will have positive impact on the lives and the economy of our people must be given priority attention. And that is why today, in spite of the fact that you did not award the project, you've taken it upon yourself to see that these projects are completed.
He commended President Bola Tinubu for his support for the Federal Capital Territory administration.
And so, there's no magic. There's no magic. It's just about commitment. The president is committed to see that things turn around in this country. And that's why we have renewed hope agenda. I'm very happy to be associated, to identify with the government and administration of Mr. President. And so we count ourselves lucky that he has allowed my humble substance and my humble self and other people to contribute our little quota in the development of FCT.
The bridge represents the 10th project commissioned by the President and a major milestone achieved in infrastructure provision for the federal capital. In Abuja for News Central, I am Amadin Uyi.
Coming up on the news, 29 high school students killed in a crush after blast during exam in Central Africa. We'll tell you more in a short while. Join us again. And I'll tell you that President Faustin Todera of the Central African Republic has announced 3 days of national mourning, and this comes after the death of at least 29 high school students in a stampede caused by the explosion of an electrical transformer on Wednesday. Just over 5,300 pupils were sitting the second day of their baccalaureate exams at the time of the explosion early on Wednesday afternoon in Bangui, the capital of the deeply poor nation.
Une très grande consternation et une vive émotion que j'ai appris la nouvelle du drame qui s'est produit ce jour 25 juin 2025 au lycée Barthélemy Boganda de Bangui, entraînant de nombreux décès et blessés parmi nos candidats au baccalauréat session de juin 2025 suite à une bousculade. En cette circonstance particulièrement douloureuse, je tiens à apporter mon témoignage de solidarité et de compassion aux parents des candidats décédés.
Now in Kenya, what began as a peaceful commemoration has turned deadly. Rights groups say at least 16 people were killed and over 400 were injured after police cracked down on anti-government protests. The demonstrations marked 1 year since protesters stormed parliament, and despite growing fears of violence and intimidation, thousands still took to the streets. For more on this, I'm joined by Nora Mbagati, Executive Director at Katiba Institute based in Nairobi. Nora, thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thank you for having me.
So how is the mood like today in Kenya following the protests that we saw on Wednesday?
To be honest, the mood is it's frustrated and it's also confused, I think. You know, we're seeing the aftermath now of the police brutality that was witnessed yesterday in response to the peaceful protests that had been previously announced as well. And there are reports of more casualties. There are reports of people who should have been arraigned today, protesters who were arrested, who should have been arraigned today, who haven't yet been arraigned. And so I think there is a bit of confusion, but largely that confusion is also spilling over into further frustration for having seen the response that we did yesterday and then seeing this kind of aftermath, also in terms of the political reaction that we're seeing.
Yeah, so in terms of response, what's your opinion as regards the police actions too during the protests?
I think the police action was outrageous, and personally, I was also really disappointed to see what we saw. There have been clear orders given by the Kenyan courts saying police officers could not, they had to be they couldn't be plain clothes. They had to wear police uniforms. They could not cover their faces. There were clear orders around the use of force and the type of use of force that is not allowed in this kind of peaceful protest context. And so seeing the way the authorities responded was really deeply disappointing, and also suggested that the police did not fully understand that, you know, you shouldn't be obeying unlawful orders. And in fact, you have a personal responsibility that comes to bear if you do so.
Well, they'll probably argue that they are bound by an oath. But then, how are civil society organizations responding to the recent incidents involving unarmed civilians?
Yeah. So first on the oath point, they are bound by an oath, but again, it's not an oath to disobey the law. And so since there had been those clear orders, the police really was obliged to police in a manner that is constitutional and that is in line with the Kenyan constitution, and that is not what we saw yesterday. In terms of how civil society has been reacting, there has been a very strong reaction from civil society, and from from people and the protesters themselves. I think already starting yesterday in terms of coordinating around what was happening, recording what was happening, making sure even during a media blackout that people were furnished with information and that information was recorded correctly. People came together to help the wounded, including the 3 police officers that we know were wounded yesterday as well. And civil society also came together in trying to hold the authorities and government to account for what was happening. My organization, Katiba Institute, together with the Kenya Human Rights Commission, followed the Law Society of Kenya in going to court over the media blackout that had been ordered. We also at Katiba went to court over the barricades that had been erected to prevent the protest from happening. And so civil society has really been coming out in full force. But the problem is of course, what is the response to that, and how do we see the authorities responding to this engagement by civil society?
All right, so some people will say that he's been disappointing, and others will say that he's just a man working under pressure, coming up with harsh economic policies. How would you rate the William Ruto administration when he came into power, and now how his administration is moving?
So I don't think in this context it is actually about rating the administration. It comes back to the pure constitutional rights that we have as Kenyans and as people living in this country. And so, yes, economic times might be tough. There might be all kinds of pressures on a president, I would imagine. But what that never justifies is acting outside the Constitution, right? And acting outside what the law provides. And so I think I would always take it back to the Constitution and say, in a situation like that yesterday, in a situation where we're seeing peaceful protesters, people who want to commemorate those who have died last year, families who want to lay wreaths at Parliament, who find barbed wire on the streets on their way there, after having announced again that they were planning to do so. That is just not acceptable under any circumstances. Regardless what pressures any administration might be facing, we always need to be acting within the confines of the law.
Well, one would hope so. Thank you so much, Nora Mugati, for sharing your thoughts with us. Outside of Africa, we tell you that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has threatened to carry out more strikes on U.S. bases in the region if Iran came under another attack by the United States. In a statement and a televised speech carried by state media, he hailed his country's victory over Israel and vowed never to surrender to the United States, while claiming that Washington had been dealt a slap after striking Iranian nuclear sites. Khamenei's remarks come 2 days after a ceasefire ended a 12-day war between Iran and Israel, the foe's deadliest and most destructive confrontation in history. It also follows a stinging row in the United States over the actual extent of the damage inflicted by American strikes on key Iranian nuclear sites during the conflict. Both Iran and Israel had already claimed they won, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailing on Tuesday a historic victory for Israel. Let's now go for a short break. When we return, we bring you business and sports. Don't go away. Talking business, Vice President Kashim Shettima has reaffirmed the commitment of the current administration to ensure that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement delivers tangible benefits for Nigerian businesses. The Vice President, represented by the Special Advisor on Job Creation and MSMEs, Temitola Johnson, made this known at the 4th Nigeria Employers Summit holding in Abuja, where he says that ongoing reforms by government are focused on streamlining regulations, embracing digital solutions, and supporting SMEs to thrive. He adds that no business can succeed under excessive bureaucracy and revealed that President Tinubu's agenda is geared towards creating an inclusive and competitive business environment.
Tinubu's administration is committed to ensuring the African continental free trade outcome works for Nigerian businesses. In addition, that no business can thrive when burdened by excessive bureaucracy, and this is why our regulatory reforms are focused on creating an environment for Nigerian businesses through the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, PEBEC. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, is making it easier to do business in Nigeria by streamlining regulations, embracing digital solutions, and supporting investors for a thriving business environment.
We have had serious challenges, multidimensional challenges at the operational level, but things are progressively stabilizing. There's some level of clarity on what you want to do and how you should do it within the context of this government. And the challenges have not disappeared, but we are happy that there's a listening here.
It's an opportunity for us to be able to sell our ideas, our ideas, our policies, our manifestos, our work plan, to the private sector. This is an opportunity for us to make sure that they buy in. This is also an opportunity for them to clear their doubts, to be able to raise their opinions, and they understand we can judge or we can, bring out the best ideas.
And in sports, the Nigeria Premier Football League, in partnership with the Nigeria Football Federation, has shortlisted 10 computer-literate referees for video assistant referee training in Morocco. This move is part of the league's strategic plan to introduce VAR technology to improve match officiating. NPFL Chairman Benga Elegbeleye confirmed the development while discussing the league's future direction. According to him, the league board has already held virtual meetings with the manufacturers and producers of the VAR equipment. The referees selected for training are expected to gain the technical knowledge needed to operate the VAR system effectively. This development marks a significant step toward modernizing Nigerian football and aligning it with global officiating standards. And we end with this. Argentine midfielder Camilo Nuin has died at the age of 18 while undergoing a knee surgery. His club, San Telmo, confirmed on Thursday. The tragic incident has left the Argentine football community mourning. Nuin, who joined San Telmo in 2022, previously played in the youth systems of Boca Juniors and Independiente. The cause of death has not yet been disclosed, but the club announced it would close operations temporarily in tribute. The Argentine Football Association also expressed condolences to Nuin's family, friends and teammates. San Telmo pledged full support to his loved ones during this difficult time. Nuin had been a promising talent in the reserve and youth ranks of the Buenos Aires-based second division side. Well, in our milestone, we come to the end of the news at this hour, but then do not forget that you can send your eyewitness report to our WhatsApp line on your screen. And of course, you can watch us on our various channels: DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, StarTimes channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Liken Onobanjo.